Welcome to today's episode of the Health Bridge podcast. I am your host, Holly B, and today I am so happy to welcome Janine Farzin back to the podcast for part two. Janine's brand is Awfully Good Cooking, which is a play on offal or organ meats. She has had a blog since 2017 teaching people how to go about processing and cooking organ meats and creating recipes and meals that your whole family will love in order to really support and boost their health. So, last time we talked all about the benefits from a biological point of view, from a scientific point of view of eating organ meats, all of the nutrients involved, and how it helps support your health. But we ran out of time and we didn't really get into the practical how to. So that's what we're going to dive into on this episode. So, if you are someone that is interested in incorporating organ meats into your diet, but you have no idea where to start, you're not alone. There are tons of others out there like you, and this episode is definitely for you. We are really going to give you some practical guidelines. Okay, so with that being said, I just have a quick ask of you. Can you please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, whether you are watching this on YouTube or listening to it on your favorite streaming platform? It really helps us get our messages out further and it helps this podcast grow. So I thank you for taking that 30 seconds to hit the little like and subscribe button. And with that, I will let us dive into the episode. Janine, welcome back for part two of our podcast. We started with our first one just talking about the health value of eating organs and incorporating organs and ancestral foods into your daily or weekly, food routine. And we didn't really talk about how to actually do this and incorporate it into our lives as opposed to just like thinking about, okay, I get that they're good for me, but now what? So, welcome back. We're going to get really practical with today's episode.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited to be back. Thank you so much for having me, Holly. And I'm also really excited to dive into this because I can totally nerd out on all the data and, the nutrition facts and how important it is and, how they just helps with so many things like liver from just increases energy and like 3 or 4 different mechanisms, like cellular level, whole body level, and then also like improved mood and focus and like concentration, improved memory. I mean, there's just like so many benefits. And I love reading the research and geeking out on that stuff. But then in practice, like how are we making this work? So I just appreciate like your thoughtfulness and like seeing that and inviting me back. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely, because I get it. I get all the nutrition stuff now. I mean, I'm not saying I have it all memorized, but like I understand how good it is for me. And yet I am still intimidated by the actual kitchen application of it. I've done some of it, but I'm not good at it yet. And so I'm also going to be massively taking notes on this episode along with all of our listeners, I'm sure.
Awesome.
So let's just first start with how do we shift our mindset from around eating organs from like this is gross to this is totally normal?
Yeah. And I think it's definitely a thing because culturally, even in the, world of new health and nutrition and like animal food camps, it's still so unfamiliar. It's just so I grew up in the 80s and the proteins that we ate were really just white meats, like very low fat white meats, like a lot of chicken breast, a lot of white fish, some pork, like not a lot of red meat. And so even for me, like there was definitely a thing to overcome. And when I started cooking organ meats, I was like, oh, I'm going to cook these at home and all that stuff. But actually, I had actually not been eating very much meat in our home for many years because I didn't eat a lot of meat, period. And so I often ate it when I was out. And then like, I just didn't even know how to cook it hardly. And then like when you go to pick up a liver, I mean, compared to like even ground beef, it can be like so bloody and gooey and like slippery. It's really wild. Like it really takes like some wrapping your head around it. And I think that, I don't say this lightly, but like creating a community that is supportive of this like matters to help normalize it, right? Because when you see it over and over and over again, like if you follow people on social media that are using and preparing and cooking every time you see it or exposed to it, I think it does help to normalize it because it can be, I mean, I did not grow up eating organ meats. These were so unfamiliar to me. I kind of maybe have a little bit of personality. It's like, like the kind of personality that could run a marathon, right? Like I'll just do the training, I'll like get up, I'll do that work every day. And I really approached organ meats the same way. I was like, okay, we're gonna eat liver once a week and like we're gonna do it on Monday nights. We're gonna start the week, right? And then we're gonna get out of the way. And I did not know what I was doing, but I just committed to that. And so I had it in our home and every Sunday I would defrost it and every Monday I would prepare it. And it was a thing, but I was like, okay, this is the way it has to be until, I realized that over time, of course, I read it's like Psychology Today in the literature, like 15 to 20 exposures. They're talking about like kimchi, Vegemite, like really weird foreign foods. Like if a Westerner were to go there and be exposed to these foods for the first time, now we have such a global food market in a sense that like we're all familiar with kimchi and stuff. But you can imagine that like even the first time you tried that, it's like a really strange food with a very, very strong flavor. And I guess the same is true for liver. So I definitely had a little bit of a like, I'm just going to do this no matter what. And that helped me get through a lot of the pain points because I didn't know how to cook it at first. I didn't know what I was doing. But yeah, and there was nobody, I have to say that like 11, 12 years ago, like when I searched on YouTube or social media, I didn't find anybody doing these things. So that was actually why I started my blog in 2017. Because even at that point, I was like, there's just not a lot of resources. Maybe I can share some of what I've learned. That was 5 or 6 years into it for me. Yeah. So just to like help people like realize that like all these resources are available. The way I got started was really like at the library and used bookstores, like looking for the oldest cookbooks and just flipping to the appendix and just seeing if it had organ meats in the back of the book and then going to those recipes and like just reading everything I could. And literally I was like, citing up to like grandmas on the bus. We lived in Chicago. I took public transit everywhere. I would like sit down next to little ladies and be like, so did you eat liver when you were growing up? How did you cook that? Like, do you remember these foods? And I was always talking to people and stuff. So I was kind of on like I'm going to make this work kind of path. But I think that being around people that recognize that, I also think that giving yourself a lot of grace is a good like first step, a little compassion there because it is so foreign. It is so weird. We have to recognize how far we've come. Even if you go today and you Google right after this, like, or right now, you Google healthy foods and Google what you're going to get, and you go to images, you're just going to see an array of like all these different images of like plates of vegetables. It's like in our world of like health and nutrition, we're really familiar with people that are eating this way, but like you have to like step back and think about the context. Most of America is still like just really trying to cut down on their meat consumption and really feels like it's bad for greenhouse gases, right? Like all the things. So, so to not only be eating meat, but then to be like, I'm going to go deeper and dive into these cuts that are super unfamiliar to me that I've never prepared before. Like you have to have a little bit of grace and be like, okay, okay, no matter how this goes, like I'm taking a step in alignment with my values and like that matters, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that living with, aligned with your values, like there's something to be said for that, even if it doesn't go the way you hope the very first time you try it. So
yeah, you're totally right. You touched on so many different things there, but one that I do want to touch on is you talked about how, if you Google healthy food or healthy diet or healthy lifestyle, all you're going to see is vegetables, maybe some fruit, mm-hmm. but all plant-based, right?
Yeah, and they're beautiful pictures, like rainbow.
Gorgeous. I know. And what I've come to realize, and it took me a while to get the right term for this, but there's a lot of virtue signaling when it comes to this narrative of what it means to eat healthy. And I want to really just encourage our listeners to explore what their initial instincts are when they hear us talking about having more of a meat and organ-centered diet versus a plant-based diet. And if that feels wrong to you or rubs you the wrong way, just get curious about it. Don't just make immediate judgments. Do a little more digging, do a little more research, question why you feel that way, and start exploring the alternative perspectives just to educate yourself more on both sides, if nothing else, right? Mm-hmm. I just think that, I'm seeing it everywhere and it's very covert sometimes. Like I see billboards that I can't remember what it is, but there's one by my house, and it's something about like the Einstein Institute or something, and it's like eat smarter or something along those lines. And
Hmm.
I was like, So I looked up the website, and it's all about how in order to save yourself and the world, we have to eat plant-based. And it's simply not true if you look at it from an ancestral perspective. So
Yeah,
again, I appreciate you, and your platform and bringing this information to light. And I love how you talked about sitting next to the little old ladies and asking them what they used
totally.
to eat, because that's where it's at. My
Yeah,
my boyfriend's grandmother just turned 98,
love it.
and she grew up, eating liver, eating
Absolutely.
stuff that she harvested
They
from
didn't
her.
waste anything.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly, and she's still kicking, you know?
yeah. Yeah, we have a librarian in our town. I mean, I live in this mountain town and there's a lot of retirees up here. And I'm still talking to all the little ladies. There's this woman who works at the public library, and she was telling me how when she was a child, they would slaughter like sheep, and that's what her family did. And that she was like, actually would like run away from the slaughter. She didn't like it. And so they would give her the worst job. So she would actually have to clean the intestines. So she had to rinse them and clean them, and then they would stuff them, and they would make like these cake things and boil it, and also the stomach as well, use the stomach. And anyway, but yeah, they ate the whole animal for sure. So she's told me, the brain, the spinal cord, the liver, I mean, all of it. And that's, I think that it's not uncommon to hear these stories from older people. That's another way to normalize these foods as well, is that you can be in communication or relationship with anybody like this, family, friends of family. And, I guess in some sense, like absolutely people that are close to that age in their 90s definitely grew up eating this way. But I don't even know if you have to, like even because of the rationing that they did during World War II, right? It brought back all the variety meat. So there's even like the generation of the baby boomers that are not even so old necessarily that may have been exposed to it as children, because it was still part of like the cultural lexicon in some sense of, having these on the dinner table. So, and for their parents who were preparing them, it wasn't totally foreign food, right? Like it was food that they were familiar with, because I think everyone had been more frugal, nose to tail, just reducing waste, utilizing all parts of animals, and like all products really. I mean, my grandparents were just so resourceful with everything. Everything was reused, and clothes was always resewn and stuff like that. So just like as a way of life. And I think that eating nose to tail also has that like low waste component, which I definitely admire, appreciate, respect. I'm happy to be part of, all that too. So, and it
Absolutely.
helps me feel like I'm living more aligned with my own grandparents' ancestral values in total, but like even I can even see it in my own family. Like having, yeah, my grandmother who passed it on, my late grandmother who was 101, she also, like my mom tells that she served liver pretty much every week of my mom's life too. And even when my dad started dating my mom, he was always there for liver night. Like he loved my grandma's liver and stuff. So, I don't even feel like, yeah, you have to go too far back. There's definitely still.
And it's such a great way to connect with your heritage,
Yeah,
because every culture has these recipes,
absolutely.
right? So
Yeah.
you can just focus on what's your individual heritage and
Hmm.
what are the spices that they used, or what are the organs that they used, and learn just one or two of those recipes, and that's where someone can start.
Yeah.
My boyfriend is Scottish blood or Scottish ancestry, and so he was at one point working on a farm up in Northern California, and they had sheep. And so they harvested some of the sheep, and he ended up actually legit making haggis,
Awesome.
which, I feel like the name is what makes everybody think haggis is gross. Like the name doesn't know justice,
Oh, it's
but
so
like it's
good,
actually.
actually. Yeah, it's so good.
So, that was important to him to connect to his Scottish roots, was like to eat Scottish
Hmm.
food and make it himself. And, not everybody has access necessarily to actually working on a farm and harvesting their own sheep, but you can still access these things through farmers, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things that we're going to talk about. It's when we're talking about getting into these organs, it's like it's one thing to learn about it, like we were saying. It's another thing to figure out how and where to buy the organs, what organs to
Yeah.
buy, how to cook them, and then to actually eat them, right? So
Yeah.
I think, getting started, let's set up the scenario for people,
Yeah.
where to source the organs, how do they make these relationships with farmers? Can they get it from grocery stores?
Hmm.
What do
Yeah,
you
let's
suggest?
step through it from the beginning. I personally think that a great way to find these things is just to go to a farmer's market, right? Because once you're in touch with the farmers, they have the whole animal. They might not have organs in their, cooler at the farmer's market, but they know where they are. They might not even have taken them from the butcher because they think that there's no demand and they don't have freezer space for, piles of organs that no one's going to eat, and they may or may not consume them themselves. But once you're in contact with them, if they know that there's demand, I mean, they should be especially our regenerative farmers. I mean, they are making such low margins and working such long hours. Like they should be compensated for every cut of that animal. So the fact that the butcher shop is often not, or the processor is often not returning organs or not giving them, things that they would consider waste, like joints and tendons and things like that, that we could utilize for making broth or stews and, for incorporating like collagen and gelatin and things like that into our diet, right? As a consumer, I want those things. And once my farmer knows that, then he can request them from the processor. But otherwise, he might not want to take them because he doesn't have demand for them. So knowing your farmer helps a lot. There's a lot of ways to find farmers. I do think that just walking around a farmer's market and starting to talk to people is a great way to do it. But there are a lot of sites. Of course, the Weston A. Price Foundation, they have local chapters all over the country and actually internationally. And you may not know this, but the job of a chapter leader, the only role that they actually have is not to like have events or functions or anything like that. It's actually the only thing that you need to become a chapter leader is just a local resource list of farmers in your area where you can buy this kind of meat, and how you can support local farmers. And it might be of varying quality, and that may or may not be specified, but that is a list that you can get from them. All you have to do is go to the Weston Price website, click on local chapters, find one that's close to you, contact the chapter leader, and they will have a resource list. So just said like a local resource list, they will give you a list of farmers in your area. A lot of times it's already been vetted, because if they are like also aligned, with eating this way and having like clean meat and regenerative, grass-fed, all these things, then they're probably going to have exactly the kind of farms that you're looking for. But so that's one source. There's other sites, the eatwild.com website. That is a little bit different format, but if you go to that website, there is actually like a map. So it has like there's a sidebar on the side of the page, and it's like find local farm, effectively something like that. You click on it and it's a map of the United States. You click on your state, and then it's like a Google map. You like zoom in to your county, and it's all pins of farms. I have found that site is a little bit outdated, but at the same time, if you contact those farmers, they often know who's farming. Like because also they're not, in my experience, when I contact farmers there, they're usually smaller. They're selling halves and whole animals. And people like that are not selling like through farmers markets and through larger scale avenues, they tend to have a lot of organs, because a lot of people that buy halves and wholes, they don't want the organs, but they are getting like pretty much the whole animal back because they process it out like in bulk packages. And so they tend to have those things, and consumers might not want them. So I have found very low cost, very high quality organs from farmers of that like variety. There's some other sites, localharvest.org, Regenerative Farmers of America. Those both also have farm finders. Those are great. Truthfully, and also like Natural Grocers, which is a Colorado-based like natural grocery store, which I found when we got out here. They didn't have it in Chicago. I'd never heard of it, but out here in the West, they have it. And that store actually carries the Thousand Hills brand, like 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. They carry the liver. They also carry Force of Nature ancestral blend products, right? Like the bison blend and the beef blend. And I think they have the chicken blend as well that has like heart, liver, and skin in it mixed into the ground chicken. So those are like having a natural grocery store nearby. Also the Thousand Hills, right? Or Thousand Acres. I believe it's Thousand Hills. If you go on their website, they have like a store finder, and it's usually like natural, like local natural vitamin shop type stores that carry their product. You could have one nearby you. So that's a great place to find really high quality meat organs. The only thing they sell is the liver, and they now have ancestral blends as well. That brand also now has ancestral blends. So with like heart, kidney, other things. So that's great. Yeah. So you can find it at stores like that. That said, you can literally like go to Whole Foods, Safeway, your ethnic grocery store, like stores all across the country, and you can find organs. It's, if you're Whole Foods does sell heart, liver, chicken feet, chicken hearts. If you don't see it in your store, it is in their distribution center. It is going to some stores. So you can request that it come to your store, for example. Yeah, so that those are always options. I feel like ethnic grocery stores, it's basically conventional quality, but you can find everything for really, really cheap of all ethnic varieties in my experience, right? Like in Chicago, there's a lot of Mexican, a lot of Polish, or like Eastern European, but like those grocery stores would all have all the cuts. And yeah, so I always feel like you want to do the best you can with all the cuts, but if you typically eat conventional beef, then why wouldn't you just eat the organ of like the best quality, like the highest nutrient dense food from like the same level animal? So I do the best I can. I like knowing my farmers, but I think that we should, Sally Fallon also is always like, it's better to have conventional beef than not to eat beef at all because it's still like more nutrient dense than other foods. So, and that is my experience as well. Anyway, so yeah, so there's so many places that you can source this, but having a relationship with a farmer, I think is so helpful because a lot of people aren't buying this, and once they know that you are, they often will save stuff, over the years, save stuff for me, give stuff to me. Like when they have excess, they'll just, if they can't sell kidneys or whatever, like all of a sudden I just have a huge bundle of kidneys. And the thing is like all of these foods can be really delicious. So just as like off the top of the, like a note from the top, like I have this website, awfullygoodcooking.com, 2 F's, 2 L's, and I have like 100 recipes on that site for every cut, all the organs, right? So I have a tab for liver, a tab for kidney, sweetbreads, brains, tripe, like things I don't have tabs for, like gizzards. You can search for them and find a half dozen gizzard recipes. So they're like, that's a great place to start. And honestly, I've been serving these meals to my family for nearly a dozen years. And so I feel like in the beginning, I didn't totally know what I was doing, but we have found so many delicious preparations. And yeah, so like, I don't know, if you can get your hands on it, like it's definitely worth experimenting. I feel like we've all kind of been sold this bill of goods that cooking is really hard and we can't do it at home and all this, but this was like, we have to, again, take a step back and be like, wait, this was the packaged food companies telling us that cooking was hard and we couldn't do it at home so that we would buy their stuff. And like, it's actually not. So like, just see if you can drop that for like 5 minutes and be like, I'm just going to get my hands dirty. And like, it's not going to take that long. It's not going to take more time than other things. I used to feel really, really squeamish when I started prepping these meats and I didn't totally know what to do. And I've tried to break that down and give instructions for like sourcing, prepping, cleaning, like each of the organs, like on a main page, like separate from all the recipes. But hopefully that can help. But if you have like questions about a specific organ, I'd totally be happy to just dive in and like give a step-by-step or
Yeah,
tell you.
I definitely do. First, let's talk about some prep. So do you have any recommended tools or like seasonings or any kind of shopping list?
Sure. There's a couple things. Like one thing that I would say is that I use my kitchen shears for almost everything. I use kitchen shears all the time. I use kitchen shears for like kidney, beef kidney will like kind of have these lobes on it and has like this kind of connective tissue and fat in the middle. I'll trim all that out, trim off like anything that's even on heart. If you have a beef heart and you cut it open and you open it up, it's going to have like all these tubes on the inside. You can and then like kind of a layer of silver skin, and you can trim all that out with a sharp knife. And I would use like my sharpest carving knife for that. But honestly, I think that the easier thing to do is just to pick that up and pull it with your hands and just to snip it off at the base and not worry about the silver skin because it's actually very, very thin and it doesn't like, I don't think that it's like too chewy or anything like that. Like around the base, the top of the heart, you're going to find like more connective tissue that can be trimmed off. And honestly, I will trim that you can trim it with a knife, but you can just cut it with scissors. So I do a lot with scissors in my kitchen. For seasonings, I actually think that whatever seasonings you already have in your home and that your family already enjoys, those are the seasonings to use, right? Like that, my husband's family is Persian and we use a lot of Persian spices like sumac and dill and, like turmeric and rosewater, saffron, things like that. And if you go on my site, you're going to find there's a lot of recipes that have some of those in them because those are familiar spices to our family. And when I prepare dishes with them, they're familiar to my kids and it's just easier to enjoy, right? So it's just like something that's like a known flavor. We also do a lot of like taco seasonings just prior to our life with organ meats. Like we really like Mexican food and tacos and stuff like that, like cumin, oregano, chili peppers. We still use a lot of those spices when we're preparing our meats. I think that like having that like a kind of a bridge to take you over helps. I think like adopting whole new spices and stuff is not always the way to go because then it's like a whole new thing on top of a whole new thing. It's like whatever your family already knows and loves, like you can find things that kind of resonate there. I will say that allspice is a great spice for liver. It kind of cuts the metallic flavor. I think that a lot of traditional recipes and a lot of different cultures I have found include allspice. I also really like ginger because I think that the heat of ginger can cut through flavors. In terms of pantry items, there's actually a book by the name, well, now I'm forgetting it, but I think it's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. It was a woman who worked in the Chez Panisse kitchen under Alice Waters. And, I think that there's something to be said for that. Like those four components make up a great dish. And I think that along those lines, having an acid, so whether that's like citrus or a vinegar or something like that, can really complement most meats, honestly, because it brightens up like a meat that could otherwise be kind of heavy. So even like a good roast could have like orange peel in it or like a little bit of vinegar or something like that. My grandma certainly really always had like red wine vinegar and like all of her dishes and stuff on the Portuguese side. So yeah, so I think that that's like kind of the collection of things that I use often in our kitchen. The same flavor profiles we already enjoy. I use a lot of shears, citrus, like acid. I think that like really brightens a lot of these dishes.
So I really love ancestral blends, and I'm curious, do you ever do that at home? And do you need specific, like a really good quality blender? Like how do you,
yeah, so they're so easy to find now. I had no idea. I'd never really seen one before COVID. And then we left our house and traveled and we drove across the country and then we were just going to random grocery stores and I discovered these ancestral ones. I was like, this is amazing. It's like all there. I had been making them myself for many years and different cuts kind of have different properties. So if you're going to prepare liver, you never want to do it at room temperature. You'll end up with mush, which is great for other applications, but not necessarily for that's perfect for making like a baked good and having the effectively liquid liver as an ingredient in that to replace milk or something. But really you want it to be frozen and kind of pulse it to get an actual blend that resembles ground meat. For other organs that have more connective tissue, like kidney or heart, I think that you can just blend them as they are. Typically, I pulse these things. So I have always made my own blends and a lot of meatballs and ground meat dishes, like gizzards or I don't know, just pretty much all of them. So yeah, so I think that you could definitely do that stuff at home. But once you have the blends, then anything that I think that's a great place to start for people that might be squeamish or think that their kids won't eat it or something, because you can even take a ground meat blend and just a regular package of ground beef and put them together and kind of dilute the blend so that it doesn't even have a strong flavor. And if you do strong spices like chili or taco or bolognese with a lot of flavoring, anything that has a lot of flavoring in it, I don't see how people don't know unless, you tell them. And the funny thing is that I think that people really crave the nutrients. And so they'll be like, this is the best thing you've made, and you're like, oh, it was the organ meat blend, right? But I don't know. I don't know if I missed your question in the beginning. Did I cover it? How do you use the blend?
Yeah. Well, actually, just if you were going to actually do the blending yourself, what equipment?
What equipment would you need? So in the beginning, I would just use a food processor at home. And as long as the meats are cold, I think it's easier to blend them. And I would just use the pulse setting. So I did that for years. We actually do have a meat grinder now. And I use that for lots of things. And I've, of course, made much larger batches of my own blends, but that is not a required ingredient or, piece of equipment at all. I think that just any kind of food processor would work fine for doing that at home. Yeah. And then you can make your own ratio and you'll see, you would see that liver is more wet, so you would add less of that. Whereas heart, for example, is it's a muscle meat, has a very similar texture to ground beef. So you could you could even use heart blended on its own as ground beef without adding anything, that you could do half and half. It becomes apparent once you blend it, how you can how much you can mix in without changing the texture.
Mm-hmm. So. And typically an ancestral blend would be a larger part of ground beef with maybe heart and kidney or liver and kidney or liver.
I think whatever you have. Yeah, whatever organs you have. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's delicious. It just gives it more flavor. And it just makes it more exciting. It does feel more nutritious when you eat it.
Yeah, I agree. I also, like I said, for years, I would always make blends and always make meatballs and stuff like that, delivered to friends of mine that had babies and everything. And they'd be like, this is the best thing ever. People that totally did not eat organs or anything like that. And I always had a sense that people craved the nutrients and that's why they liked it. So,
Mhm. Yeah,
um,
makes
I
sense.
don't know. I still believe that. So people don't know what it is. They'll be like, this is so good. It's like, it's not me, it's your body like speaking to you. So
Love it. So, okay, so what about, let's talk specifically about some different organs. So, let's start with liver because that's where you started. So,
sure.
what do I do with the liver as far as preparing it?
Okay, yeah. So if you have a whole liver that is like super overwhelming and you can hack at it with a cleaver, but I would definitely say that I have defrosted organs like this before, cut them into like partially defrosted just to the point where I could cut them up and then put them into portion sizes because even sometimes like a 2 pound package of liver or even 1 pound for two people, I mean, that's a lot. And I mean, it's too much. Liver is the kind of food, it's like if you're eating salt, like, and you're just like eating salt out of your hand, at some point you're like, I've had enough. And liver is so nutrient dense. And there's some point where I do feel like your body's like, okay, we're good. Like we're all filled up on all this, like this was great and thank you, but we're done. I've seen it with all my kids too. So if you have a large package, that can be overwhelming. And I know you're not supposed to refreeze things that you've defrosted. You don't want bacterial growth in the defrost and then to happen many times, right? But for practical purposes, I have done it in the past and knock on wood, all been fine. But I would say that for defrosting liver, like beef liver, for example, what I would do when I defrost it is that I would look for the silver skin, like a very thin layer of like kind of whitish or like silvery, edge on it. And there's also these tubules that kind of run through it. And that also is kind of the same material and it's like a little bit thicker. And I would trim all that off. So if I can get my finger under it, you can peel it off really easily, actually. But sometimes if it's just on the cutting board, I will take a knife and just trim the edge right off to get rid of that silver skin. And the same with the tubules. I'll just like make a little indentation around them and just remove them. The thing about that silver skin is that because it's like more of a connective tissue compared to liver, which is actually kind of a funny organ, it's really just like an agglomeration of cells and it doesn't really have a lot of structure, which is why it can turn to mush if you blend it, for example, and why it's kind of wetter when you add it to a blend. So you don't want a ton of liver in a blend because it will make the blend kind of watery. But because of that, the silver skin around it really has a different property. And the silver skin, as soon as it kind of gets into contact with the pan, it will kind of curl up. And in the like, if it does that, it will just prevent the liver from laying flat in the pan. So you'll never be able to have it. Like you won't be able to cook it evenly. So trimming off that silver skin and trimming out any tubules that you can easily get to. I don't go crazy if there's like some in there. I don't worry about it. But if they're near the edge or something and I can just take it off, then I just take that out right away. And then I don't have to worry about it. Then I know I can get it to lay flat in the pan. I can have a nice saute. So yeah, that's the first step I would do with liver. And I do think that I used to say for years, like, oh, don't overcook liver, I had overcooked it for so many years that but now I just have realized, I guess because I overcooked liver for all these years, my oldest son actually like loves an overcooked liver. And like, I don't know, other people in my family totally don't because the flavor becomes more intense. So there's like more intensity of flavor the more it's cooked. And it also can get dry and crumbly if you really overcook it. But really, even if it's just cooked through, it has a more intense flavor than if it's kind of rare. But when it's rare, it can have like a kind of a gooey texture. Again, like it's not familiar with respect to like texture because it's not like a muscle meat. So I used to always say don't overcook liver, but I've kind of revised that. And now I just say experiment because, like I said, I have children that prefer it both ways. My oldest son, he hates the texture of like the gooey, like almost rare liver. Like he will not eat that, but he has no problem with the strong flavors. And he's the kind of kid who will eat capers, anchovies, like lots of strong flavors, and he actually enjoys them. So for him to eat the fully cooked liver, also because like I said, I didn't know what I was doing when we first started. I think I overcooked all the liver for a long time. He's just like, this is what beef liver is supposed to taste like. This is fine. This is great. Yeah, but then other people like that flavor is way over the top. It can be really intense. It can even have some bitter tones to it, which of course is great for digestion, right? Like we all need some bitter in our diet. Sulfur compounds, which is like really amazing for like cell regeneration and things like that. But all these things like give it like flavors that are really unfamiliar to us. So yeah, so now I just say experiment in the pan. Like I think starting on high heat really helps because then you can get a nice browning and like searing without risk. Like if you don't want it overcooked, it doesn't have to be. you start with a lower temperature. It takes a long time to bring it up. The other thing is that because liver is like not uniformly processed, it's really hard to find it. Like what I get from my local butcher or farmer might be very different. It could be like a very thin 1/8 inch strip. It could be a 1/4 inch. It could even be thicker than that. And if you have a butcher, they could even put it in like a thick steak for you if you prefer to have it rare in the middle. So yeah, so it's like kind of hard to say like, oh, cook it this long or cook it this way. I do think that adding some, like I said, some acid, like kind of finishing it off with like lemon juice or balsamic vinegar or something like that, like really brightens it and makes it awesome. But I do think that like there is some element of like you've just got to experiment with preparing it and determining like really what you like best or like what you can tolerate. You might have a sense already and like go with your intuition to start. But yeah, don't be afraid of like a little bit of a rare liver. You might really love it, you know?
You were mentioning acid, and I've seen so many differing, recipes and step by steps. Some things say you have to soak the liver, pre-soak
Yeah.
the liver in lemon juice or in milk or something like that.
Buttermilk. Yeah.
What is
There's
your
so many. I mean, I actually don't feel like it makes much or any difference in the final flavor. But admittedly, for many years, I did always soak the liver. And for me, it was, I guess I have to say that it was part of a process of becoming acquainted and like becoming friends with the liver. I was like, okay, I'm going to make liver. And then I was like, I really don't want to do this. So I'll go soak it. Also, I'll try soaking it in one of these things, right? And then I'd be like, no, I'm preparing it. I'm doing something, right? It's like but I don't have to do anything here. Like I put it in a bowl and like cover it in something. I don't know. So yeah, lots of different preparations will call for those things. I think that one of the benefits about liver is that it is so quick and easy that it's really like not necessary to do a lot of that stuff. However, like I really enjoyed the process of that for many years. And I think that there's something to be said for that. I mean, you can also like add salt, like kind of acidulated, like salt water can be, I can, of course, like I'll just salt the meat afterward, or while I'm cooking it afterwards. But, back then I was like, okay, if I season the meat first, I could have a deeper flavor or something. I have found for the most part that the most flavor comes from like making like a butter lemon sauce and like pouring it over the top in like 20 seconds when I take it off the heat and just throwing some butter and squeeze a lemon into the pan. I think that has like a much bigger effect on the flavor than the soaking does. The soaking can do a couple of things. If you have organ meats that are really bloody, it will like pull that blood and like any impurities out. So a lot of times like brains and sweetbreads are often soaked and every time you change the water, you'll notice it might be a little cloudy or something. And then every time like the organ is like whiter and whiter. And I think that from a culinary perspective, like that made it more desirable, right? Like this long soaking time would make it like a really white sweetbread, which has like a lot of appeal, can look very beautiful. You don't want to have like these bloody patches on it necessarily. So I think that for that purpose, and the same thing is true with the liver, like it can remove some blood or impurities, but I don't know. I don't find it to be essential.
Yeah, so it's more of an aesthetic appeal rather than removing blood that could potentially be harmful or affect us in any way.
Not harmful. I feel like more aesthetic. I mean, it can kind of neutralize the flavor and like moderate it and just lessen it a little bit. Like the intensity of flavor will come out, like just like some of the intensity will get just drained off. Like every time you soak it, even if you soak it for an hour, but you change the water every 15 minutes or so, every time you're taking out a little bit more. And, liver is such a powerhouse of nutrition. I don't think that you really risk like losing all the nutrients at all. But yeah, but you do pull out a little. And of course, like blood is a super nutrient rich food and liver is very high in blood. So yeah, but I think that for the most part, it's like just if you like to do it, then it's a great practice.
Okay. So with liver, there is, the standard liver and onions.
Yeah.
So liver patés. Do you prefer using poultry liver for patés?
I do both. I mean, beef liver can have a stronger, like more intense flavor. So I think that chicken, pork, whatever, it's like more common. But I also, you can also mix patés with as much ground meat or other, cuts as you want. So they don't ever have to be intense. Even a beef liver pate could be blended with other, beef. It doesn't have to be all liver. And actually, I just feel like for pork, it's actually very common that it would be like half ground pork or, and like a quarter or like a pound of ground pork and a quarter pound of liver or 2 pounds, half pound. It's like there's always a ratio. It's never like traditional recipes, I feel like very rarely are just like 100% liver, like refined culinary things. So yeah, like I'll just make liver pate because it's like a vehicle for liver. And like, I know that that's what we're eating, but when I make something fancier, it's always a blend. So yeah, so I don't really have a preference. I think that getting the right spices for the right meat, and again, I would go with spices that your family likes for that meat, right? Of course, like I said, allspice, you'll see in a lot of traditional recipes. Yeah, I mean, you can go anyway. I mean, you can go like Chinese five spice powder. You can do like thyme and, rosemary and bacon, like, just like whatever culinary style you like. Like I would just do that, do the same thing for your pate, truthfully. There's so many good recipes, but like again, like there's really no mystery in like cooking, and like you can totally do it at home, and like you can totally just do whatever spices you like, even if there's no recipe for it. So I also found that like if I find like cooked meat recipes that I really, really like, I can just take that spice blend and put it into a pate, and it's usually really good. Like we do a breakfast sausage seasoning pate, and it's like just literally a recipe that I found one time for making breakfast sausages, like sage, nutmeg, cayenne, salt and pepper. And I just put that in the pate, and then like all my kids love it, right? They're like, oh, it tastes like sausage, right? It's like so good, breakfast sausage. I don't know. So like again, whatever your family likes, I think it's a great place to start for pate. Bacon, of course.
Hungry.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, bacon's a winner. Like if you're a little bit unsure about your pate, like definitely like just do a blend of like half liver, half whatever. And like, of course, bacon grease, like always makes things taste better. So there's some like obvious things like that where you're like, okay, that's a known winner. Like if I throw in a ton of bacon, the pate is probably going to be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like every time.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned sweetbreads and you mentioned brains.
Mm-hmm.
I've had sweetbreads sitting in my freezer for I don't want to tell you how long.
It's time to pull them out.
I
The
know.
first step with all of them is defrosting the meat. That's always the first step. Like you have to commit to defrosting, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do something with this. I defrosted it. Like, what am I going to do? So again, I have like several sweetbread recipes on my site, so you can peek over there and like just see if there's something that looks good to you. That's a great place to start. But I do typically soak sweetbreads. It's also another culinary thing to like press sweetbreads. So they're often like pressed. So like you could poach them for like 10 minutes or something, and then like they'll cook a little bit and they'll kind of curl up at the edges and they'll be a little bit firm and tight. And then if you take that and you like put it on a baking sheet, put a baking sheet on top with like a weight on top in your fridge, then the next day it'll be like totally flat in the fridge. And that makes it really easy to like pan fry, right? Because it's already like flattened out. So if you had sweetbreads in a restaurant, they probably would have done that to it first. Again, that's like the soaking it and like the pressing it. Those are like, I definitely feel like they're culinary applications. They are not required. Breads have like a really rich, like, I don't want to say meaty. It's a white meat. So it's not like a red meat, but it's just like a rich meaty flavor given that it's a white meat. So it's just so it doesn't really have any strong flavors. It doesn't have any off flavors, and it's going to adopt whatever sauce you cook it in. You could do something as simple as sauteing it in butter because it's really just going to pick up the flavor of the butter and taste like butter. I mean, if my kids would eat sweetbreads like every day of the week if I serve them. They're just so kind of divine. But a couple things that you can do with them is grilling them, like put them on skewers. So sweetbreads are like all these little kind of nodules or like nodes, and they're all kind of connected by this membrane. And so you can trim off the membrane. Again, like something I would always use shears for in my kitchen, kind of pull it back and trim off as much as I can. But as you keep trimming it off, you're going to end up with like smaller and smaller kind of units of sweetbread. Like you'll end up with a sweetbread, like you'll start with a sweetbread like this, and then you kind of trim off all the membrane, but then one of them separates. Now you've got a piece over here that's like this and a piece. So you just trim and trim and trim until they're the size you want. So if you're going to grill them, you'll take them a little bit smaller and kind of uniformly sized. So just trim around till they're that size. You're never going to get all the membrane off. In the very beginning, I would like trim all the sweetbreads, and then I'd be left with like all these little nodules like that big. And it's like, how am I supposed to make a dish out of this? But then actually, if you look in traditional cookbooks like Marcella Hazan, Essentials of Italian Cooking, like she's just like, oh, like butter and peas, and like tomato, like stewed tomatoes, and then like the sweetbreads are just mixed in there. I've put sweetbreads in like, again, in those little tiny pieces, minestrone soup. So it's almost like having a white bean with, all of the whatever seasonal like component, like vegetable components. It's like it's just it's kind of has a nice give to the bite, and it just has like a really rich and delicious flavor, and it will take on whatever spices you cook it with. So yeah, it's great. I'm all for sweetbreads, and I think that you should just like defrost it today and like go for it and
I'm
message
doing
me
it,
if you
I
need help.
promise.
So
And in my heart, I'm taking them out as soon as we're done recording.
awesome. Awesome.
Now, what about brains? I know that that's pretty traditional in, like, we're here in San Diego, and that's really a kind of a traditional food down in Mexico. A lot of
Totally.
Mexicans up here grew up eating that. As
Yep.
a, white girl with a mom from Ohio, I had never heard of cooking brains. So what is that like? Is it like
Yeah. So I know, and my mom actually was Portuguese. I mean, is Portuguese and growing up in an immigrant home, like they had a lot of braids, and she always thought it was like this really weird food that differentiated them. And I have this funny story that she told me where they went to like this really fancy hotel when they went back to Portugal one time, and they stayed. It was like a castle, and they were like serving brains on the menu, and she was so appalled because she was like, I can't believe that like these rich people would eat brains. But yeah, it's definitely like a delicacy. So brains is it's a very fatty cut. It's like almost all fat. So anything that you might that's why it's like often paired with scrambled eggs. I would say it has like like the similar. I mean, an egg is a totally different thing. So it has like this white membrane and then like the yolk, but and not even when it's mixed together. But there's something about it that kind of just like does flow with like scrambled eggs and brains, I think are traditional dishes in many, many cultures. And definitely something that my mom grew up with. And it was the first brains dish that I made. And it just is kind of gooey and fatty, and it just cooks into the scrambled eggs the way that, I don't know what else to say except for the way that you would expect. Like I'm telling you, it's like kind of a similar consistency, and it is because of that special property of brains where you can cook it into something firm. Again, like you can press it and then like you can poach it so it like firms up a little bit, and then you can slice it into strips, and then you can like take those strips and like pan fry them, right? And have like little brain fritters. So you could have something that's firmer. That kind of thing is going to have like a crispy exterior and a really giving, crunchy, tender interior. But the other thing is like all the things that that you would need a fat to mix in. Like I made a chocolate mousse and I just used brains for the fat because like it just got blended with all the ingredients. Like so if you're making a custard or something like that, like it's just like a fat. You can make mayonnaise and just use brain like as the emulsifier. So it is like it doesn't really have a specific property. You would have to poach it and set it to like have something that has any firmness to it in order to slice it. Because otherwise, if you slice it, it just kind of collapses. It's more like liver in that regard. Like liver doesn't really have a structure. It kind of falls apart, especially once you take the silver skin. Brain is even more so like that. It has a membrane. You have to like take off that membrane from the outside. But yeah, but you can. So I've done like things that you would think about like doing with a scramble, you could do with brains. So I've just scrambled brains with like vegetables, like the same way I would. Yeah, I did a Halloween one, like beets one time for my kids. I don't know. So like, yeah, and it just has in the end, it cooks up. It kind of has a property of like scrambled eggs, like just like little pieces that are, like a nice give and relatively fatty. And again, it's a white cut. I mean, it's not even a meat or like a muscle per se, but because of that, it's just going to adopt whatever flavors you cook it with. It doesn't have a strong flavor of its own. So any spices or herbs that you use, yeah, I mean, brain fritters like sumac, again, like Persian spices that my family already likes, like that, it just tastes like lemon juice and sumac or like lime zest and sumac kind of thing. So yeah, we'll just pick up the flavors you cook it with.
Can you use like an air fryer to make the fritters?
I
Like,
don't have an air fryer, but if I think that you could, anything that you would use to fry, I'm sure that you could put them in there. You could bread them. I mean, it's traditional bread them in flour or breadcrumbs, but you could certainly bread them in pork rinds. There's always like a sort of meat-based like alternative that you could do to skip flour and stuff like that. So yeah, you could just bread them in anything like that and just fry them or just fry them. I guess the air fryer will just fry it without any toppings and it'd be crisp on the outside. It will always be tender in the middle. It's always going to be very giving. Oh, another one that I've done is like cover it in like grated Parmesan cheese. That's like a one without flour. Like, poach it so there's slices, and then you can dip it in egg so it has like a coating, can stick to the coating, and then like just cover it in Parmesan cheese and then fry it that way. So that's also like an awesome way, or you could just scramble it with cheese. I mean, it's really like so easy. And so like 30-second preparation kind of thing and really delicious. Yeah. And my kids actually love it. Like It's so funny because they grew up with this for the most part, like they didn't even know until they were older that like other people didn't eat these things, that they were just like, oh, it's normal. And then they like all have their favorites, you know? So the fritters, like sweetbread fritters, green fritters, like they love stuff like that. I mean, who doesn't like a fried food that's like crispy on the outside and like warm and giving in the center?
Agreed.
Awesome. And like whatever flavor profile you like, you know? Yeah. So
Does it matter what type of animal the brain's from? Like, is there different flavor profiles or it's generally about the same?
I would say it's there for the most part, it's a very mild cut.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, wherever you can get it from, I would say is the best thing. So there was a risk of like, there was mad cow disease in the 1980s, and then they basically like outlawed brains. It's like very hard to get them, and only some processors will process them now. But the funny thing is that most people don't even know is that actually the risk of mad cow is actually in not limited to the spinal cord and the brain. It actually could be anywhere in the cow and also in the stomach, which is another reason why tripe can be difficult to get. But if you have confidence that your animals were raised regenerative, I mean, the problem with the mad cow was that they were feeding recycled animal parts to herbivores. So, the conflict there, I don't really need to expand on that. It's like so unbelievably outrageous. When I purchase these cuts from regenerative farmers, I feel like I have a lot of confidence that there's pretty much zero risk of that. Mm-hmm. So I know that people will be like, oh my God, you eat brains. The funny thing is that nobody says, oh my God, you eat tripe. But it's actually the same risk with respect to the medical or like the literature on the disease and like the pathology of it, and like where it's harbored in the body and how it can be spread and stuff like that. And there is a risk of that. And that is another reason to, of course, eat regenerative whenever we can. Of course, it supports local economies. It keeps dollars in our local economy. It supports our farmers. It keeps a robust food system outside of the industrial food chain. I mean, there's so many reasons, but for the health of the animals as well. Like it's just, yeah, the thought of like feeding animal parts to an herbivore is like still outrageous. Sorry, go ahead.
I could talk about that topic for hours on end.
Yeah.
The health of animals, the health of the environment, everything is looked at when you're talking about regenerative farming. So
yeah,
please support your local regenerative farmers. But that's just another reason why it really pays to have that relationship with your local farmers, because you can ask them questions. You can go see the farms. You can be very confident with how your meat is being processed and the life that it lived leading up to that point,
Yeah. And some of these cuts you really can't access unless there's on-farm slaughter. And I mean, the other benefit is that with on-farm slaughter, you know exactly what animal you're getting and the health of that animal because you can look in and see the organs right there. So there's a lot of clarity, even with a processor. Small processing houses have a lot more accountability, of course, but there's always a risk that you don't get back the same animal that you gave them, right? And not necessarily for nefarious reasons, but just because mistakes do happen when there is an operation. So small processors are going to have a lot more accountability, but on-farm processing is certainly the highest level of accountability, not to mention that you can verify right there the quality and health of the animal. And also you can get access to many of these cuts that otherwise may be inaccessible. So you can always take them for your pets. So if they're not for sale, like if some cuts are not for retail sale, you can always take them for your pets. And your pets will benefit from them as well. Like, no doubt, right? Absolutely. So yeah, and you may as well. You might also benefit from the nutrients of these.
Totally. So. We're just about coming up on time here, but I just had a couple more questions. Maybe we can just quick fire through a couple more.
Okay.
Kidneys we didn't talk about, and testicles we didn't talk about, and tripe.
Yeah. Kidneys.
Special about those we need to know. Are they good? Are they
okay? So the thing about kidneys is that they can have a really intense odor and they can smell like urine when you're preparing them, and that is hugely off-putting. Okay, I said it. They can smell like urine. The funny thing is that I would go as far as to say that liver has it has like a lot less smell, but it can have a more intense flavor. The funny thing about kidneys is that it can have a really intense odor and people are like, oh my gosh, I could never eat that. I won't eat that. But actually the flavor is much more mild than liver. And everyone in my family, shockingly, loves kidneys. Every time I have ever prepared them, from the very first time that I prepared them, I was like, there is no way I'm going to eat this dish. Like, it is not going to happen. Like, I've been in the kitchen with the steak and kidney pie for like 3 hours. And like, I am like, there is no way. I would serve it. Everyone would eat it. I'd be like, I should try this. And I sit down and be like, this is so good. I mean, I have tons of kidney recipes on my site because everyone in my family loves kidneys and we have made so many delicious dishes over the years. So I would say, don't be intimidated by kidneys. go for it. If you have them, just defrost them. Go onto my site, see how to trim them up, and just find a recipe because there's so many, and you'll find something great that you love. So that's awesome. And then testicles, yeah, I think the testicles, this is like half of everything required to like create human life. So it's like a super nutrient dense food. And it's also a white meat. You can totally play it off as chicken. It has like a little bit more of a jiggly texture. Again, liver, brains, like organ meats are different, right? They're not muscle meat. It's like not the same thing. But at the same time, if you cook them, they're going to firm up and they're going, you can cut through them with a fork and knife and like eat them like a piece of chicken, like a very tender piece of chicken. And again, because they're white meat, the intensity of flavor is not really there. So it's very easy to like just season them in any way you love. Again, like you can fry, and you're talking about fritters, like testicle fritter, very easy to just like fry up little. You can cut them, either however you cut them, with or against the grain. You can get like small strips and fry them up. That's great. And you can also just mix them into tons of stuff, soup, like all the things. So those are great. And then tripe is a bit of work. Tripe, I get fresh tripe, so I have to clean it. It takes a lot of rinsing. It often has like literally like grass and sand in the folds of the stomach. There's all these little villi, in our stomachs that are absorbing all the nutrients, and you really have to kind of work your way around that. So I do spend some time underneath a running faucet. If you can do it outside, that's great. But in my kitchen sink, and I'll just clean that all out. I will parboil the whole thing, discard the water, and then I have something that I could use in a recipe. And it needs to be cooked slow and low. We didn't talk about tongue either, but same thing. It needs to be cooked for a few hours. For a regular sized beef tongue, I would say 3 to 4 hours. But once it has been cooked for a long time, it's a very tender meat, and you can use it in a variety of ways. So I would say a lot of traditional recipes with tripe will mix it with like, tripe is very high in all these different proteins and amino acids, collagen, gelatin, things like that. But it's often also paired with trotters, feet, marrow bones, other gelatinous cuts, and it's often prepared in soups and stews all around the world. Almost every culture I have found that I've looked up has a traditional recipe for tripe. Very common food. And, it's like menudo is like hangover food in Mexico, like all the B vitamins and stuff like that. So yeah, so I think that all of those, like hopefully, like we were talking in the very beginning about normalizing organ meats, hopefully just like hearing all this stuff. And, I always feel like the more time people spend with me, they're like, oh, I can do this. Like, oh, it is normal. Like, oh, these cuts are like totally accessible. I'm like, no, you can cut it. You can cook it. It's like, and also like just, like we're just sold this like shortchanged on this like bill of goods that we like can't cook anymore. So we like go out and buy all these packaged foods. Like, this stuff is not hard. You're already cooking ground beef. You're already cooking steak. Like you can throw this stuff on the grill. You can throw it in a pan and fry it up. Like, you've got this, like, it's good. So I have a free masterclass. If you go to my website, you'll find it, the Liver Lover Challenge. You can head on over there. I have a free masterclass on how to cook any organ meat. I kind of dive into connective tissue. I dive into nutrients, like why we want them all in our diet. And you're welcome to join me for that anytime. So yeah, I would love that. But yeah, any questions, reach out. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all Awfully Good Cooking.
Awesome. This was so good. I am so hungry. I need to go pull stuff out of my freezer.
Just put in a bowl in the fridge. Time to defrost. Yeah, you never know about that packaging, especially if it's been in your freezer for a while. So I always recommend putting it into a bowl to defrost it, because you don't really want like kidney juice all over your shelf. But pull it out and just let it defrost. So give it a couple days where you get to like start thinking about it, be like, hey, what am I going to do with this? Like, what was that website again? Okay, like Awfully Good Cooking, and find something I can do, or just message me, send me a message on my site, and I would love to help you out. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Janine, for being here again.
Thank you, Holly. See you next time.
So are you as hungry as I am? Maybe if you haven't tried any of these organ meats before, you still might be feeling a little bit iffy. I have had the opportunity to eat some of these things before, a few of which I prepare for myself, most of which I've had from restaurants or other talented home chefs. And I'm telling you, my mouth buds are watering. So I really am holding myself to it. I'm going to take those sweetbreads out of my freezer right now, and I will keep you posted on what I create with those. But I really meant it. Reach out to us. Let us know what you tried first. What are you cooking? What recipe are you going to start with? Reach out to Janine. She's so approachable. Her website is amazing. She's got so many recipes on there. So go start scrolling, save a few things, and next time you are at your farmer's market or at the store, talk to the butcher, talk to the farmer, get something that seems the most approachable for you, even if it's buying a ready-made ancestral blend. That is such a good way to start. And, it's such a good way to introduce it to the family as well. So let us know what you do, what you think, how you enjoyed this episode. And we look forward to seeing you here for the next episode of the podcast.